Picture this. You are standing on Earth 201 million years ago. The ground beneath your feet isn't just shaking, it is vibrating with a deep, resonant frequency that suggests the planet itself is screaming. Mountains are being born from molten rock right before your eyes. The sky, usually a pale blue, glows a bruised crimson through layers of choking ash. You try to breathe, but the air burns your throat with the taste of metal and sulfur. Yesterday, you were freezing in a sudden volcanic winter. Today, the heat is unbearable, baking the moisture right out of your skin. Lightning tears across darkened skies, not in individual strikes, but in sheets of electricity, igniting wildfires that span entire continents. The rain offers no relief. It falls black and heavy, laced with toxic mercury that poisons everything it touches. All around you, the species that have dominated Earth for millions of years are dying. Mighty predators collapse, their lungs failing. Ancient lineages vanish in the blink of an evolutionary eye. The food chain disintegrates from the bottom up. This is the Triassic-Jurassic Extinction. It is the largest volcanic eruption in Earth's history, an apocalypse that is currently erasing 80% of all living species. But look closely. Amidst the fire and the ash, one group of small, unassuming creatures is watching. They are about to pull off evolution's greatest underdog story. They are waiting for the smoke to clear so they can claim the throne. We all think we know how the dinosaur story ends. A space rock, a flash of light, a cosmic punchline. But what if I told you that before that asteroid, dinosaurs survived something far, far worse? The Triassic-Jurassic Extinction occurred 1.4 million years ago. To understand the sheer scale of time we are talking about, T-Rex, Spinosaurus, and Triceratops lived closer in time to you and me right now than they did to their ancestors who survived this catastrophe. That is how ancient this event was. When this apocalypse struck, dinosaurs were not Earth's rulers. They weren't the apex predators. They weren't the biggest animals. They were the ecological underdogs. Scrappy, middling creatures trying to survive on a world dominated by animals you have likely never heard of. The late Triassic world was utterly alien. It was a time of extremes. The climate swung violently between brutal wet seasons and arid droughts, punctuated by mega monsoons. The supercontinent Pangaea was beginning to fracture, causing geological upheaval worldwide. If you walked through a Triassic forest, you wouldn't be looking out for a T-Rex. You'd be looking out for Pseudosuchians. These were the true kings. They held the throne. They were evolutionary cousins of dinosaurs, but they came from a completely different branch of the Archosaur family tree. And frankly, they were absolute monsters. Let's look at the competition dinosaurs faced. Pseudosuchians were nature's perfect killing machines. They were hypercarnivores with massive, boxy skulls packed with serrated, razor-sharp teeth designed to shear through bone. Take Pseudosuchus, the crocodile from the Post. It terrorized North America, measuring over 4 meters long. It was a quadruped that could likely rear up on 2 legs to deliver a killing blow, combining the armor of a crocodile with the agility of a tiger. Then there was Pseudosuchus from South America. This beast is a contender for the largest non-dinosaur land predator ever. It reached 10 meters in length and weighed several tons. It was the lion of the Triassic, but the size of a bus. These animals had solved the riddle of survival. Some walked on 4 legs. Others were bipedal, looking eerily similar to dinosaurs through convergent evolution. Poposaurus, for example, could fool even expert paleontologists at first glance. It walked on two legs, had small arms, and a long tail. But it wasn't a dinosaur. It was a crocodile cousin. This proves that nature had found the bipedal runner blueprint long before dinosaurs perfected it. The diversity was mind-boggling. Shuvosaurus broke the carnivorous mold entirely. It was a bipedal herbivore with a beak resembling an ostrich mimic, yet it was related to crocodiles. Sharing the waterways were the phytosaurs. If you saw one, you'd scream crocodile. They had the same armored skin, the same low profile, the same jagged teeth. But look at the nose. Their nostrils were high up near their eyes, not at the tip of the snout. They were a perfect example of convergent evolution, nature proving that if you want to be an aquatic ambush predator, this is the shape you must take. The late Triassic teamed with life beyond these dominant groups. Giant amphibians, like the metaposaurs, lay in the riverbeds like living bear traps, dwarfing anything alive today. Bizarre dicynodonts, mammal-like reptiles with turtle beaks and tusks, roamed the plains in herds. The oceans were even more chaotic, filled with massive ichthyosaurs approaching whale sizes and placodonts with teeth like cobblestones. And somewhere in this crowded, noisy, intensely competitive world, overshadowed by monsters, lived the dinosaurs. They were the backup dancers, the background characters. They had no idea their moment was coming. By the late Triassic, dinosaurs weren't newcomers. They had actually existed for over 30 million years, longer than our genus, Homo, has existed. They had evolved from tiny, cat-sized insect eaters into reasonably successful animals. Two major groups had emerged. First, the long-necked sauropodomorphs, like Plateosaurus, the ancestors of the giants that would later shake the earth. Second, the bipedal theropods, the lineage that would eventually produce the T-Rex and modern birds. They were successful, yes. They had spread across Pangaea's fragmenting landmass. In some fossil formations, like Ghost Ranch in New Mexico, the small theropod Colophysis is found by the hundreds, sometimes thousands. This is clear evidence that they were social, adaptable, and flourishing despite the harsh, arid conditions. But they were modest. They weren't pushing evolutionary boundaries. Even the largest dinosaurs of this time, like Camelotia from what would become England, weighed around 4 tons. Roughly a small elephant. Impressive, sure. But compared to the 10-meter Pseudosuchians, they were prey. Dinosaurs lived in the shadows. They scavenged. They ran. They hid. They lived across Pangaea, which included modern-day England, Morocco, North America, and Antarctica, because all these lands were one massive supercontinent. But deep beneath their feet, that unity was about to shatter. The engine of the Earth was waking up. Deep beneath the crust of Pangaea, a monster was building. Geologists call it CAMP, the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province. In the 1990s, scientists were puzzled. They kept finding massive ancient volcanic rock deposits, basalt in places that shouldn't be, connected. They found them in New Jersey, the Palisades Sill. They found them in Brazil. They found them in Spain, Morocco, and France. When they analyzed the chemical signature of these rocks, they realized something terrifying. They were all the same. They were born from the same event at the same time. When you reassemble the puzzle pieces of Pangaea, these scattered deposits form a single, colossal scar in the center of the supercontinent. As the landmass began to rip apart to form the Atlantic Ocean, the crust thinned and the mantle depressurized. The result wasn't a volcano. It was a flood. We often compare volcanic eruptions to nuclear bombs, but that implies a quick explosion. This was not that. This was a continuous, bleeding wound in the Earth. The most famous extinction event is the Permian Triassic, the Great Dying, caused by the Siberian traps. Scientists initially thought camp was smaller than the Siberian traps. They were wrong. The Siberian traps covered 7 million square kilometers. Camp covered 11 million square kilometers. It remains the largest known volcanic event in the solar system's history for the last 500 million years. Imagine an area larger than the United States or the entirety of Europe covered in lava. Not just a thin layer, but mountains of it. In Morocco today, you can visit volcanic cliffs from this event that stand 300 meters tall. Studies estimate camp ejected up to 6 million cubic kilometers of lava. That is 1,500 Mount Everest's worth of molten rock vomited onto the surface. And it lasted for 600,000 years. That is 3 times longer than modern humans have walked the Earth. It came in 4 distinct, punishing pulses, giving life no chance to recover. Let's walk through the mechanics of this apocalypse. It wasn't just lava. Lava only kills what it touches. The gas kills the world. Phase 1. The volcanic winter. When the initial fissures ripped open, they blasted sulfur dioxide, SO2, into the stratosphere. Sulfur acts like a mirror, reflecting sunlight into space. Almost instantly, the planet went dark. Global temperatures plummeted. A tropical world plunged into a deep freeze. Photosynthesis stopped. Plants withered and died. The herbivores that relied on constant feeding starved within weeks. The warmth-loving reptiles of the Triassic froze to death in their burrows. Phase 2. The Greenhouse Inferno. But a volcanic winter is short-lived. Sulfur washes out of the atmosphere in acid rain. What remains is carbon dioxide, CO2. Camp released thousands of gigatons of CO2. Once the ash cleared and the sun returned, the heat was trapped. The planet swung from an icebox to a sauna. Temperatures jumped by approximately 10 degrees Celsius, 18 degrees Fahrenheit, globally. In the interiors of continents, it was even worse. Imagine standing in London or New York and experiencing temperatures hotter than the Sahara Desert, but with 100% humidity. This super greenhouse effect pushed animals past their thermal limits. Proteins began to denature. Organs failed. Life simply cooked. Phase 3. The firestorm. The temperature difference between the hot land and the cooling oceans created superstorms. Hurricanes of unimaginable power battered the coasts. But on land, the heat dried out the vegetation. Lightning strikes increased 5-fold. The fossil record shows a massive spike in inertanites, charcoal. The world was on fire. These weren't normal forest fires. They were high-intensity infernos that burned the soil down to the bedrock, stripping away nutrients and leading to massive erosion. Phase 4. The invisible killer. Perhaps the most insidious element was mercury. Volcanoes release mercury vapor. Camp released so much that it poisoned the entire planetary food web. Paleontologists have found fern spores from this era that are mutated, twisted, and deformed. This is genetic evidence of mercury poisoning. Animals didn't just die of heat, they died trembling, with nervous systems ravaged by neurotoxins, their gums bleeding, their bodies failing from the inside out. The acid oceans. The oceans absorbed the excess CO2, turning the water into carbonic acid. The pH levels dropped. This caused the calcification crisis. Organisms that build shells, corals, mollusks, microscopic plankton, found that their shells were dissolving faster than they could build them. Coral reefs collapsed completely, losing 96% of their diversity. The oceans became anoxic, oxygen-depleted dead zones, choked by purple sulfur bacteria. By the time the eruption ceased and the Jurassic began, 80% of all species were gone. The oceans lost the conodonts, eel-like creatures that had survived 3 previous mass extinctions. The placodonts vanished. The giant shastasaurid ichthyosaurs, the whales of the Triassic, were wiped out. On land, the devastation was total. 73% of all plant species went extinct. Broadleafed forests vanished, replaced eventually by hardy conifers. But the most shocking loss was the Pseudosuchians. The Triassic-Jurassic extinct. The Dinosaurs extinct. The Phytosaurs extinct. The Ornithosuchians extinct. The entire ruling class of the planet was decapitated. This ranks as the 3rd deadliest extinction in Earth's history, surpassing the asteroid impact that would later kill the dinosaurs. Yet, one group was remarkably, inexplicably absent from the casualty list. The dinosaurs. Why them? Why did the dinosaurs survive when their tougher, bigger, scarier cousins died? They lived in the same forests. They breathed the same air. They drank the same poisoned water. Science suggests it wasn't one thing, but a survival trinity of adaptations. Dinosaurs had air sacs that extended into their hollow bones. Air flowed in a continuous loop, ensuring that fresh oxygen was being absorbed both when they inhaled and when they exhaled. In a volcanic world where oxygen levels may have dropped, and the air was thick with toxins and ash, this super-efficient system allowed dinosaurs to run, hunt, and metabolize while other animals were gasping for breath. The growth strategy. New studies on dinosaur bone histology, the microstructure of their bones, show they grew incredibly fast, much faster than the Pseudosuchians. In a world of constant disasters, you don't have the luxury of a slow childhood. You need to hatch, grow, and reproduce as quickly as possible. Dinosaurs were the weeds of the animal kingdom, fast-growing, energetic, and adaptable. The trap of specialization. Pseudosuchians were specialists. They were evolved perfectly for the specific climate of the Triassic. But in evolution, perfection is a trap. When the environment changed, they couldn't adapt. Dinosaurs were generalists. They were small. They were omnivorous. They could eat bugs, plants, carrion, or each other. When the forests burned, they switched diets. When the big game died, they ate the scraps. When the volcanic ash finally settled and the poisoned skies cleared, dinosaurs emerged into a silent world. The monsters were gone. The competition was dead. The planet was empty, scarred, and waiting. This is where the age of dinosaurs truly begins. In the absence of rivals, dinosaurs exploded into the empty ecological niches. This is known as ecological release. Within just a few million years, a blink of an eye in geological terms, they became the giants we know. Ornithischians, bird-hipped dinosaurs, diversified into the armored stegosaurs. The Triassic-Jurassic Extinction gave us every single dinosaur that has ever captured the human imagination. Without camp clearing the board, the Pseudosuchians would likely have continued their reign. We might never have seen a T-Rex. We might never have seen a Triceratops. Dinosaurs weren't the only winners. Look to the skies. Pterosaurs, the flying reptiles, had struggled in the Triassic. They were small, rare, and competed with other gliders like the lizard-like Charovipteryx. But camp wiped out the gliders. Pterosaurs, perhaps benefiting from the same warm-blooded and fuzzy traits as dinosaurs, survived. With the skies empty, they grew. They evolved into the masters of the air, ruling alongside the dinosaurs for the next 135 million years. The Triassic-Jurassic Extinction was the crucible that forged the modern world. It was a 600,000-year nightmare of fire, poison, and acid. It broke the world apart and put it back together in a new shape. So, when someone jokes that dinosaurs were failures because they were eventually wiped out by an asteroid, remember this: before the space rock, dinosaurs had already beaten the odds. They survived the greatest volcanic event in the history of the solar system. They inherited a broken, dying world and turned it into a paradise of giants. They built an empire that lasted 135 million years. For context, we humans have been here for 300,000 years. Dinosaurs ruled for 450 times longer than we have existed. That is not failure. That is the greatest success story in the history of life. They were survivors, they were opportunists, and ultimately, they were kings who seized their crown from the ashes of the apocalypse. It all began with fire, and eventually it would end with fire. But in between, oh how they ruled. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Earth's most chaotic history, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We are going to be exploring the Permian extinction in our next video, the one time life almost ended completely. You don't want to miss that. Thanks for watching, and stay curious.